Hey everyone, welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest is the acclaimed filmmaker who has over the years bended the rules of filmmaking, whether adapting a book no one thought possible with the classic Orlando, to shooting a film in verse with Yes, or being the first to premiere a feature film on cell phones. Sally Potter has always bended the rules of filmmaking. In her new film, The Road Not Taken, she explores dementia and the fragmented past of a man trapped in his own mind. Javier Bardem plays a man and his daughter is played in another stunning performance for her career by Elle Fanning. I'm honored to have sitting next to me right now, Sally Potter. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I love this film. I love Javier Bardem's performance. I feel like the idea of someone going crazy or losing their mind, crazy, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, though I think it can be taken that way. Someone losing fragments of their mind and getting trapped in it is a story that I think oftentimes people try to tell, but I feel like you've actually done it justice. You haven't skirted away from what could be hard about that. You haven't in any way shied away or tried to make where he's trapped light and easy. Where did this come from? What made you want to tell this story, and why was this the first one to be entirely about a man for you?
Well, that's quite a few questions in one.
Take it away.
Okay, first of all, it's not entirely about a man, but there is a man at the center, Leo, played by Javier Bardem, in a 24-hour period being looked after by his daughter, played by Elle. We discover that he's in a dementia-like state, although it's not clear exactly what state, but we know he's somewhere far away in his mind. But where is he going? Is he going into parallel lives? So these kind of slices of coexistent realities. Is it a fantasy life? Is it memory? Is it whatever? By the end of the story, we find out exactly what it is. Although everyone may have a different interpretation, but I know what it was. Yeah. But this was in...
It seemed pretty clear to me by the end what it was, but maybe that is just me, an overconfidence in my own interpretation.
Your interpretation, anybody's interpretation is right. There's no such thing as a wrong interpretation. Everyone creates their own film in the way that they watch it, and the way that they understand it, and the way it relates to their own experience. But of course, I know what I was intending and where it came from in me. And it came from two places in me. One is that my younger brother, very sadly, developed young onset dementia, and I looked after him in the couple of years until he passed on. But I learned an enormous amount through that experience. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes it was sad, sometimes it was crazy. I saw how he was treated by sometimes the medical establishment and others in a disrespectful way. But what I found was that he was still fully there. He was a complete human being, but where was he going when he seemed so far away? So I started to ask myself that question about, in a way, time travel within the mind of somebody who appears to have lost it or be elsewhere. And then the other question that kind of got, in a way, joined into that is, well, all of us hold within us other sort of possible selves, lives we could have lived, the person we could have been. We tend to cling on to one identity and name ourselves as one thing or another, but we know that if we'd made different choices earlier in our lives, traveled a different road, a road not taken, we might have ended up somewhere. We might have ended up somewhere else. Yeah. So that's how that idea, exploring that idea, looking into, if you like, somebody's mind, which cinema can uniquely do. The movies are like a kind of representation of a kind of inner frame. If you turn the spotlight around and look inside your head, we all have different stories running, thoughts, memories. I could do this, or tomorrow I could do that. Yesterday I might have done this, and so on. We're an incredibly complex bundle of neurons firing this way and that way and the other. And the movies the framework of cinema can I think, very well duplicate the ways that our minds work. So that's what I tried to do, is humanize somebody who appears to have a mental disability, a neurological problem. They're a whole person, and inside their head, they could be going somewhere really interesting. Quantum physics, physicists talk about parallel realities. Everything that's possible could be coexisting. Okay, that's one idea. But we all know that also our potentialities, what we could be in life, are scarcely explored. We are more than we manage to live out day by day. So that's the premise of it. And it's the man's mind that we're exploring, Leo, the wonderful Javier Bardem. And it's the daughter who has the job of caring for him. And all that means, that little word, to care, all that means for anybody who's ever looked after a child, who's ever looked after their own parent or their grandparent or a sick friend, what that, in a way, work of loving is for somebody, that feeling of compassion and sort of aching kind of empathy for somebody else's difficulty when you try and care for them. And Elle Fanning manifests that so beautifully in this story.
She does a wonderful job of showing what is tragic and what is not tragic for the person who is caring for someone in that situation. Because from the outside, to a person who's not in there, you would assume everything is tragic in the moment. But she has a sense of humor for something, or she knows that because he hit his head a little bit and fell down, like it's dangerous, but this is something she's used to, and she knows that it happens. Yeah.
Well, I had that experience with my brother. You know, sometimes we'd have kind of farcical situations, and the best way of dealing with it was not to think of it as tragic, actually, but to think of it as comedic. You know, some classic, somebody slips on a banana skin. Is that tragedy or comedy? Okay, it's a matter partly of interpretation. But also when somebody's in, whether it's a dementia-like state, and I learned there are many, many varieties of dementia, of which Alzheimer's is only one. It's the one everyone knows about, but there are many different conditions. I had a friend with multiple sclerosis who ended up not being able to speak. They're mysterious, these conditions. But there's often a kind of sense, even in the way that when somebody's speech starts to get broken up, if you go into the way they're talking and think of it as a kind of weird poetry, you can communicate very well with each other. Or a physically difficult situation can become a cause of mutual laughter. You can kind of have fun in the midst of the chaos. And Elle listened very carefully to the stories I told her, but also used her own imagination to see how she could bring that quality of lightness into what could be at times considered a dark and difficult situation.
I guess it's my interpretation that these roads not taken are moments from his past that could have gone a certain way, right? And he's sort of living them out in his head. And I'm wondering why I don't want to give too much away, but why they end the way that they do, if that makes sense. Because they are not... do you know what? I don't want to give anything away. Do you know what I mean by when I say why they end the way that they do?
Well, let's put this in a frame. This whole story takes place in 24 hours. And in his head, he's visiting these other lives, these other selves. Now, in the way I was thinking about it, we all make decisions earlier in our life, let's say in our 20s or early 20s. Could stay with this person, or could change, no, this relationship isn't working, let's move to this person. Could stay in this country, could consider emigrating or to another city, could commit to this career path, or could go that way. We make great, big, life-changing decisions. Now, when you take the path you take, the road you take, the premise of this story is maybe another part of yourself carries on down that other road, the road not taken, in parallel. But we're not able to access it consciously. But in this story, the person whose brain is doing weird stuff is perhaps able to see, to slip in and out, like slide down one neuron or whatever in the brain pathway into these parallel possible selves. So they're not so much memory as memories as they're in parallel lives. Now, in a way, it's a familiar concept, and in a way, it's a difficult idea that multiple me or you exist out there. But it is how the mind works. The mind can't always distinguish between a memory and something happening in the present day. If you do a brain scan and you have a memory of eating a banana, we've been talking about bananas, and then actually eat one, the brain fires up in the same way. It can't always distinguish between these things. So, yeah.
So these parallel lives are essentially mirroring the emotionality of his day-to-day life as well.
Well, they're the consequences. If you go down one life, let's say you go down, like one of his lives is on a Greek island, right? Trying to be a writer. He's a slightly blocked writer, but there he is on a Greek island. Now, if you've been living on a Greek island for 20 years, you're going to have a little more salt in your hair, you're going to have a different diet, your skin tone will be a little different, you'll have a different relationship with another language or another culture and so on. But you'll be the same person as if you'd lived in the city all your life. You hadn't lived by the sea. You hadn't been trying to be a writer. But you'll be subtly different. The environment will have shifted you one way or another way. So what we're seeing is, if he'd gone this way, he'd be like this. If he'd gone that way, he might be like that. And he's seeing those possible selves clearly and in parallel. And they're not necessarily better. They're not romantic, like, oh, it would have been fabulous if I'd gone and done this. Because he's the same person. He's the same troubled man dealing with a confusing world for him.
Right. What draws you to making a feature film? Because you have been aesthetically daring a number of times with your films. I would say most of the time when you set about making a film, is it the story first, or is it finding a story that can link up to the sort of aesthetic ideas that you want to explore?
It's really, what's the film I have to make? What's the film I feel like I will die if I don't make? What's the film I can bear to live with for the 3 to 4 years it takes to do it and still be excited by after it's already done and I'm talking to somebody about it?
A lot of practical reality there, right?
It's a big, demanding medium, but it's a thrilling medium. Yeah. And it's, despite streaming, despite box set videos, despite supposedly short attention span for people who live on the internet and so on, despite all of the above, the feature film still holds a very, very special place. It's a thing that you can hold in your mind afterwards, that you can revisit. You can maybe, if it's a good one, you can watch it many, many times and find something in it. It's a classical form.
It's a definitive piece. Right? Like, I mean, a streaming television show or a television show is in general.
An experience.
Yeah, and it's constantly, it's a group of writers in a room trying to figure out how to keep this thing going, by and large. Even when you have one person at the helm, there is still that element of it. A feature film it's one piece of art. It's like looking at a painting in a way.
It tends to be a single vision. Look at the credits at the end of any film, right? Don't underestimate how many people put their life's work, their energy, their feeling into a film, but nevertheless, a feature film has a single vision and a single person at the helm who knows what it's going to be or wants it to be, who guides it through to the very, very end. And that singularity, whether people are conscious of it or not, I think makes it, paradoxically, for something that's so big, incredibly intimate. It's a one-on-one experience. You sit either alone at home, maybe watching it on the DVD or streaming it, or you're in a big theater watching it with hundreds or even a couple of thousands of people together as a collective experience. But you, as an individual, that film is for you, and it is delivered to you from another. So it's the paradox of that it's so big and monumental and can endure. I think of the great films from the past that one can watch again and again and again and find magic in.
What are those for you?
Ooh, there's so many that I wouldn't even know how to begin. But Citizen Kane, or Singing in the Rain, or Battleship Potemkin, or the list goes on and on and on. There are certain films you can watch again and again and again.
Making a film for a lot of filmmakers, I think for most filmmakers, if not all, is a battle in a way, right? And even the way that you just described it, where it's like, what can I live with while making for 3 years? You've been doing this since the early to mid 80s, right? Making movies. Has there ever been a moment where you have thought that you wanted to stop?
Never.
It's amazing.
No, never. My only feeling is, why haven't I done more? And why can't I do it quicker or more often. But, I'm a writer-director. That means, and writing is the slow part and the most essential part, actually.
How long does it usually take you to write a script?
Well, you can do a draft if you sit down and just keep going in 6 weeks or something. But you can't do a script in less than a year is the truism,
Really?
Because film writing is not writing, it's rewriting. Yeah. It's re-examining, going through it, shaking it about, looking at the structure, rewriting the dialogue, thinking about the characters, tracing each line through it, thinking about the color palette, thinking about this, thinking about that. It's the architecture. It's the bones and the skeleton, and it becomes the flesh of it. It's a world.
Trimming as well, right? I mean, it's rewriting, but I feel like the great film writing often is like learning how to write a scene or tell a story with in as brief a time as possible.
Well, feature film is about distillation.
Yeah,
so
distillation.
It's not really naturalism, even when things say it's quasi-realist. In fact, you're always reducing to the essential, or you're trying to. Not so much that it becomes abstract and meaningless, but it still needs flow, but it needs to... you're pulling a lot into like an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's some films are longer, but let's think of it as the hour and a half is the classic shape. Where, a television series 1, series 2, series 3, and as you rightly say, for practical reasons, apart from anything else, many voices involved in creating that. So it's like an experiential flow. The equivalent more of the 19th century novel, like Dickens or somebody who did it who put out an episode, a chapter, every week in the newspaper or something, is the equivalent of that. But a feature film is a thing, a whole thing, though you still experience in time, but you can hold in your mind as a total entity, as a sort of a small universe.
How are you the type of writer that writes every day? Do you write every day for your scripts, or do you wait till you have an idea and then start working on it?
If I waited, then nothing would be there. No. What I learned from my years as a dancer is you don't wait, you practice every day. Otherwise, you don't get better. So it's all about discipline. Tiny bit of inspiration, great when it comes, but basically it's about doing it, redoing it. It's a muscle. Writing is a muscle.
Right. Even if you don't have an idea for a movie or you don't have a script, you will wake up and you will just find something to write or find something to just, at the very least, be exercising the muscle?
Ideas are 2 a penny.
Right.
There's always loads of ideas. Anybody can have an idea, but what's difficult is realizing the idea, giving it a shape, finding a shape, making it into something worth exploring, worth doing. But still, you need to know what's if you like, the driving idea, the controlling idea, the essence of it, even if it then has this tangent, this character, that theme, and so on. But there has to be sort of something at the core driving it along.
How much do you adapt your scripts when you start pulling in casts? Like you have one script and then you get Javier and then you get Elle. Do you start thinking of how should we change the script according to them a little bit and what
I always change it according to the casting. I take it as far as I possibly can on the page, alone in a room, imagining. But then there comes a point where that process is going to become embodied by one specific individual. And my goal is always to make it feel like no other person could play this role. So how do you do that? You tailor it like a jacket. Somebody has a different shoulder or a different way of moving, and you make it comfortable for them so they can breathe within it. So it feels like they've been living in it for a long time. And these can be small adaptations or large. Sometimes it's teeny-weeny things, the structure of a sentence, dialogue, or it can be larger things. So that's a really interesting process, because at that point, as a scriptwriter, you have to, in a way, relinquish the shape you imagined and discover something else that's more exciting. It's not a loss to relinquish. Throwing away, being prepared to jettison, is a crucial part of writing. It's what you throw in the bin. It's what remains that counts. Similarly in the editing process, and that's joyful. It's like the thing is coming alive.
Have you ever found that, I mean, obviously, when you're making a film of a certain budget level, of a certain type, there's like a list of people that you can cast. And I'm sure you generally get the cast that you want because people really want to work with you. You're an incredible force in independent filmmaking. But have you ever found that, like, oh, this is not exactly what I was thinking for this role at all. I will have to tailor this in a much different way or figure this out. But this person is a fantastic actor and they will get the movie made?
I don't think that way.
Really?
So, and I don't like the idea of this list of possible actors. I think it's insulting to all actors. You know, A list, B list, C list. What the hell? You know, these are individuals who have incredible qualities. It's true that I've worked with a lot of incredibly wonderful actors who also happen to be very well known and well regarded. But what I've discovered is that all the great actors have something in common, a certain kind of humility in the sense that they always want to go further. You know, good actors never rest on their laurels on what they thought they were. They want to push themselves into zones where they're afraid to go. So that's the paradox of it. Great actors are often very afraid because they want to take a risk, and that's scary. They don't know if they're going to fall. So your job as a director is to hold that space and encourage an atmosphere of risk, and in a way hold the hand of the actor metaphorically and kind of jump off the cliff together into this new zone. And so whether they're world famous or not famous at all, they're going to have an extraordinary experience and move forward. And you're going to have an amazing experience moving with them.
How does that fear manifest itself in the process?
Oh, well, it can look different in different actors.
Yeah.
It can look like trembling and just a face that's kind of rigid with terror, or it can look like it's complete self-assurance. It can look like a bit of temperament. You know, my dressing room isn't big enough or whatever. But these are the classic things, you know. But all of those things are just that underneath. The actor who is incredibly exposed, is a vulnerable individual, always doing their best, reaching for some kind of authenticity or truth or whatever. And it's important to know that as a director.
Is that something you knew right away going into making films, or something you learned over the course of your first few movies? I mean, was it your first feature was with Julie Christie, right?
It was the first feature, yes.
The first feature was with Julie Christie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an incredible actress to have worked with, right?
It's pretty good.
Yeah. Did you know around that time, like basically the temperament or the mind of the actor, or was that something you were learning?
I had already been a performer myself in my 20s, so I think. As a director, you have to know a little bit of all the aspects of filmmaking. You have to know about editing, about shooting, about this and about that. Otherwise, you can't delegate to your beloved collaborators and push them as well as far as they can go, the people behind the camera. But I think unless you've performed a little bit yourself, you don't know just how raw and exposing it is and how you can look like an idiot. You fear you're going to look like an idiot. You can fall on your face. People won't like you, or, whatever, the whole panoply. So I think that's very useful. So I think essentially my understanding about actors came from that. My grandmother was an actress and she told me stories. I have, to a certain extent, I have it in my blood, if you can believe such a thing. But I think I think it's partly that direct experience. And then I learned from all the actors I was working with, and I gradually learned what works, what doesn't work, what helps them, what hinders them. Certain actors you need to, in a way, create space and kind of just step back and just watch in a very respectful and appreciative way. Others you need to move in, give lots of instructions. That's what's going to create safety and structure for them. Or others, it's just specific feedback about things they're doing or not doing. But above all, it's about preparation. So I always work one-on-one with each actor I'm going to work with, as many hours as we can muscle to get together, to build up trust, to find out what makes them tick, how they come to life, where they get bored, whatever. And I learn that through that one-on-one, getting to know each other place. call it rehearsal if you like, but it's really about kind of deep preparation.
I imagine you had to do a fair amount of that with Javier on this film. I mean,
You can say that.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what type of actor he is, but the performance that he gives and what he is required to do within this film, especially in the scenes where he is, suffering from the form of dementia that he is in that moment, and he can't really speak, he can't really talk, he's lost, he has to have lost eyes. That must have been a fair amount of trust and preparation.
A huge amount. He went into it with incredible courage. But I went many times to Madrid. We would sit there. We would do these marathon days, like 12-hour days, 3 days in a row, and just work through it all. Work through the personal stories, work through how does this relate to somebody I knew or something I've done myself or whatever. In his case, or in my case, I would tell him some stuff. We would talk through the scenes, the lines, the everything, pull it apart, throw it about, chuck it upside down. He also did his own research. He visited a clinic in northern Spain and talked to a neurologist and met people suffering from similar conditions, frontotemporal dementia, which is a very specific kind. So
temporal dementia?
Frontotemporal dementia affects the frontal lobes of the brain, and it's a specific variant. But it also combined it with a kind of aphasia, speech difficulties, which not everybody with dementia-like states suffers from exactly that. It's not so much about memory, it's more about difficulty with communicating and then some motor functions and so on, behavioral things. So he did his own independent researches about that, and I told him stories about the people that I knew and what I had learned from neurologists and specialists during the period that my brother was ill, while I was trying to find out as much as I could about this mysterious but very pervasive condition. So we spent really a great deal of time together, and then I would go away and rewrite a little bit. And of course, his first language is Spanish, so that led to thinking a lot about translation in every sense. Translation between Spanish and English, the use of some subtitles in the film in the Spanish-speaking sections, but also what's it like for a first-generation immigrant who has a first language that is not English, who then has a child who grows up in the new culture and is, so to speak, an all-American girl, like Elle looks like. This very, very familiar immigrant experience where there's a big divide, in a way, between the two generations, and the child is wanting to know and understand the history of the parent who's come from who has a different history behind them and a different culture behind them too.
Yet feels slightly disconnected from him in the state that he's in, because it's unclear to her where he is existing in his mind and how far away she is from that, right?
I mean, she gradually figures it out.
Oh, yeah.
By the end of this 24 hours, or in the end of this film, the pieces of the jigsaw do fall into place. But during the day, she loves him as a daughter can love her father, but she's confused by his speech. But she wants to find out. She doesn't assume, therefore, that he's not there, and is angered when people refer to him in the third person. Does he like this, or shall we? All that kind of stuff that everybody with disabilities talks about. It's terrible, kind of dehumanizing thing. And so she's protective, like a tiger. She's protecting her father, and if you like, she's by his side during this very tumultuous day.
I hesitate to use the word brave because it's an overused word in regards to performances, but for Javier, this is an extremely brave performance, and the trust must have been immeasurable when you were on set. Is this the type of situation where he's looking at dailies with you, looking at the monitor with you afterwards, or he's just fully in it? Because that's incredible to know, to be aware that whatever you're doing is coming across, is reading. I think this is probably the greatest fear for an actor, is doing a performance like this and having it not come across or not work out.
Well, as the director, you have to be the mirror. The monitor, forget it. Having people clustering around a monitor and looking at what they've just done, they start to auto-correct. Right. It's a disaster. So I have a general rule: never.
Get away from my monitor.
Do not look at the monitor. Nobody.
Nobody.
Well, the DP, obviously, people,
Yes.
or the, hair and makeup people who need to check something, how it's reading on camera or whatever, but actors never.
Do you view from the monitor, or do you watch the actors from outside
I
the monitor?
do what I think of as kind of simultaneous. I hold a very small monitor in my hand or around my neck, so I can check the framing, make sure the camera moves are working as I want them to, or do we need to change the lens or whatever. But I also flick back and forwards with my naked eye to the actor, because my experience generally is actors need to feel that my attention is with them, and with them only, actually. So I concentrate a lot on the power of, I don't mean to mystify this, but the power of focused attention on somebody.
No, that's not mystical at all. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So that's what I do. I try and hold them in my gaze, and they can then rely on that gaze. And sometimes that gaze is on the monitor, but they know I'm looking at the monitor because to check that they are framed in the way that will correctly enhance their performance, and not that there's some weird shadow on their nose or something, something that's going to be a distraction from, or they're out of focus or whatever it may be. So it's part of the protection, actually, of the actor, is constantly checking. But I'm not I don't hide away under a black drape looking at the monitor only and leave the actor alone out there somehow doing their thing. That's not the way that I work.
Like scream lines at them, or
No, but some people
bigger,
do.
faster.
Some people do. They choose to work that way, directors, for good reason, because they know that in the end what counts is what you get through the camera. Right. It's not what you see with your naked eye. It's utterly different. But I'm looking at people with my naked eye and giving them one-on-one feedback constantly for different reason. Not because it's because I can see better with my naked eye, but they can feel me looking at them. And so it does something else to their performance as well.
In the green room, I brought up that this was your only film about a man, and you said, no, actually, most of my movies are 50-50 men and women, but because women are less prevalent than 50% of movies, everyone thinks they are female-centered films. And I had said that my take on the character, it being a man, was that there is a privilege that comes with being a man, about like these roads not taken that could have led to somewhere more incredible, and men are always kind of exploring that in their heads and worried that life could have been easier or better if they had done one thing over the other. And the women in my life, I have found, don't operate that way, which is a huge generalization. I'm sorry to all the women in my life if you've just not told me that you operate that way, but are much more focused and pinpointed and almost like laser pointed in terms of the decisions that they've made and they've had to make because of the way life is structured around them. And you had said something that I thought was so interesting. This is a very long-winded question, so give me the power of your gaze. And you had said that oftentimes when you make movies, people don't just think about the character. They think about that character as a representation for the gender or for the gender as a whole. And I feel like that must be something that you have dealt with outside of just this film, your whole career as a woman making films about 50% about women. What has that been like? Has that been something that you've wanted to fight, where you've had to say, no, this is about this woman, not all women? I'm not making.
I'm going to have a little trouble unraveling this question.
Yes.
It's quite thematically rich and complex and very interesting.
Mostly about me. No, sorry.
About you, the women in your life, whatever. Okay, point one. Dig a little deeper with the women in your life. They may not say that they're content with their lot and not thinking about the roads not traveled. Every single woman I know, dig down, you're going to find grief and rage in equal mixture about the potentialities not lived out by them, by their mothers, by their sisters, by their grandmothers, by whatever. The great silencing of women. Okay,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
That grief and rage is yes.
It's just that men have more entitlement to talk about. I could have been a contender, but men deal with disappointment. And back to your previous question, by the way, because I didn't entirely answer it. Courage. Yeah, it takes great courage for a male actor to portray fragility and vulnerability, especially if you're Spanish. And your persona, if you like, your cinematic persona is quite, masculine and sort of bullish. So to take that sort of skin off and mask off, if you like, or construction of masculinity, whatever you like to call it, and show this beating kind of heart of vulnerability, disappointment and regret and so on, does take great courage. It's hard. Back to what you've just been talking about. Yeah. All female directors bear a twin kind of burden and privilege, which is whatever you do, whatever you show, it's considered to be flying the flag for all of womanhood, right? It becomes a kind of proscription. It's like you have to make a film with positive role models, or you have to move forward all women, you know. Men, meanwhile, male film directors can make a film about basically whatever the hell they want. Right. All men, some men, a woman, this subject, go to outer space, do science fiction, do this, do that. The whole world is their canvas and whatever interests them. Women are supposed to stick to the subject of women, actually, paradoxically. And thus, my decision at this point, how about if I turn my gaze, my happen to be a woman filmmaker gaze onto the male subject? You know, what am I going to find, and what am I able to explore in that way? By the way, there are also many other women in this film, extraordinary actors: Salma Hayek, Laura Linney, Elle Fanning, and others in smaller parts too. It's not that this is only a film about all men. There is one man at the center of it, but he's defined by the way that these other women relate to him or don't relate to him. You know, so it's a kind of reverse of how women are often set up in narratives, that they are defined in terms by the men. So it's kind of a reversal. So it's a big entanglement of issues, actually, about how women are on the screen and how female film directors portray both women and men. And of course, very similar issues pertain to filmmakers of color, that suddenly they have to always be representing the experience of the group that they are part of, or somehow flying a flag for that, and are not free to just deal with whatever they want.
Yeah. For the purposes of my own conscience, I want to backpedal on my question, because you are correct, and I think I poorly framed it, and what I was referring to was this privilege that men are much more allowed to explore it publicly, I think, than we often allow women to explore that idea about themselves publicly, if that makes sense. But please take that apart as well.
Well, I'm just wondering if it's true. I think if we think of it, that
broad generalization.
Yeah, but I mean, it's that there's been very little public space for the expression of female experience. Men through the ages have portrayed women, and in some cases brilliantly. You know, writers, Chekhov, and so on. We know that a lot of portrayal of women in film is a bit on the thin side, you know, a bit dull and boring. It doesn't really do much, but not entirely. You know, somebody like Bergman, you know, who took female women at the center, perhaps sometimes a rather romanticized or mystified view of female experience, but nevertheless he tried. So I can't completely generalize about it. It was you backpedaling.
It was me backpedaling, that's all. But I think that your answer to my backpedal is incredible, and I want to hear more of your thoughts about that, about the way that women have been portrayed in film for the past 40 years. Obviously, it's a broad question, but I like this idea that Bergman, who's always been thought of this way, is actually mystifying or romanticizing female experience.
Well, a little bit, you know. There were. I mean, look, a lot of people. You know, he's a great filmmaker, right? But a lot of the women seem to be a bit kind of mad, or, you know, falling about or about to kill themselves or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm generalizing wildly now about Bergman, and I'm a fan of Bergman.
As am I. But
Right.
of course, his view of madness is also a romanticization in a way at times. It's tragic, but it also ends up becoming like revealing of greater truths about everybody, which is not necessarily the case with madness.
Okay, so that's complicated. But but we know that
this
there's
interview is
but you know what?
complicated.
We need to go back as well. Let's not generalize about cinema too. Think of Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. Think of all the amazing writing in Hollywood in the 50s and so on. Think of Bette Davis and these wonderful parts for extraordinarily complex women, often written or co-written by women, by the way. They had amazing writers in the studio system at that point. So it would be wrong to just sort of obliterate the whole history of representation of women in the cinema. But the fact is that there is a correlation between the very, very small number of female directors and what happens to the images of representation of women rather than authorship about women and about men. Of course, there's a correlation, and that balance starts to shift. But that shouldn't then turn into, if you're a female director, don't get out above your station. You must make films only about women and about female experience. No. Female directors must be able to take on the whole world and everything that's in it.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, do you think we should wrap up our complicated interview?
Wrap it up? No, this is just beginning.
Yeah, we're just getting started. The Road's Not Taken comes into theaters this Friday, correct?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
This Friday, New York, LA, and then it will be expanding afterwards?
Yes.
Yes? Sally, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally Potter. Good to see you.